Welcome to Liberty Action Network, and we'll be talking today about education. How do we solve the problems of a system that is continually failing millions of children? And on our program today, we have a special guest, Israel Teitelbaum, who co-founded Parents for Free Choice in Education in November 1998. Several days after the U.S. Supreme Court let stand a decision by the Wisconsin Supreme Court that had ruled the nation's first school voucher program in Milwaukee to be constitutional. The organization has since grown and evolved to Alliance for Free Choice in Education, serving as the nation's leading organization and advocating for a universal school choice on both the state and national level. Israel, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So you've been working on this for quite some time, and I think one of the things we might do to clarify for people the whole school choice matter. People have heard the term school choice for quite some time, but we've also heard things like school vouchers, opportunity scholarships. So I'm wondering if you can briefly give us an overview of school choice.
School choice basically is the means to get parents to have control of their children's education. Right now it's government that decides where you're going to go to school, the education you're going to get. And primarily, education is a parental responsibility. So how do you get it back to give control to parents? And the way to do this was actually proposed way back in 1955 by economist Milton Friedman, who said that the way to do this, to give it back control to parents, is give them the money. Let the money follow the child. Rather than the government taking all your money and saying, you go to this school, give the money to the parents, not in cash, by the way, so they call it a voucher. It's like a check. And now there's a newer way to do it that I'll explain, but not the moment. Basically, it's giving the money, but not as much as they're spending now, because they're spending way beyond what they should be spending. Non-public schools are providing excellent education for much less money, in many cases less than half, even a third in some cases, for an excellent education. So if you give them that kind of money, a lot less than they're spending, taxpayers will save a lot of money. Education will improve by force of competition. It's just like when you go buy something. The reason free enterprise is so successful in America to get the best products for the best prices is through competition. When there are producers and providers of products, services that are competing for your business, that's how you get the best products, and that's how you get the best prices. And that needs to be done for education. As we call it vouchers, but it doesn't have to be called vouchers. They call it scholarships. Whatever they call it doesn't really make a difference. But what it does do is put the parents in control.
The parents are in control, and the money goes with the child to the school. All right. Okay. Now, I've looked at your legislation. You have a draft of legislation now to address the solution. Really, this is a solution. Absolutely. Right? We've described the problems endlessly. Right. And now you're focusing on, you've moved to solutions. And I'm looking at the summary here, and you're proposing what is called the D.C. Civil Rights Act for Equal Educational Opportunity. And the first thing that caught my eye is why D.C. civil rights? So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, D.C. has a lot of advantages. This has to be done in every state. But the perfect place to begin would be D.C. because D.C. is one district that comes directly under the United States Constitution. States have their own constitutions that sometimes are not exactly in agreement with the United States Constitution. For example, when it comes to school choice, there are a lot of states that have what's called in their constitution the Blaine Amendment. There was a fellow Blaine years ago, tried to do it on the national level, wasn't successful, but he managed to go state by state and get a clause into their constitution that says no money could go to a religious institution from the government, even indirectly. So a school voucher, it would have to have to be fought out in court for a lot of the states. New Jersey doesn't have that, so New Jersey is a much easier way to do it. But still, D.C. is ideal because D.C. comes directly under the federal government, directly under the Constitution, and it's just one district. They're spending out of control. It's $30,000 what they're spending right now per child per year. And the kids are not really getting a good education there. They only have 56% graduating high school. 56%. And a lot of those that graduate are also not ready for college. They have to have extra help to get up to college level.
And remedial courses when they get to college, right?
Right. And that costs also a lot of millions of dollars too. At any rate, so D.C. would be the perfect place to as an example for the entire country, would be a model, and you'd see right away how good it works, and then all states could copy it. Another thing about D.C. is that it's controlled by Congress. So you have a greater base of support. Everyone in the entire country, every voter in the entire country can be in touch with their legislators. They can, every voter could really call their congressman, their senators. It's one phone number, by the way. If you want to give the number that everybody can call, everybody could become a lobbyist for school choice. Very simple.
Citizen lobbyists.
Yeah, it's a simple number. It's 202-224-3121. You hear it a lot of times around, but it's a number that every voter could call and reach. You're not going to get to speak to your congressman or to your senator, but what you could do is ask for the legislative aid on education. And they may ask you who you're representing, what organization. Please be free to talk. You're from the Alliance for Free Choice in Education, because we are all really allied together. We all want this.
So it is important, you raise a good point, is that the staff are assigned to different legislative projects. So you have a staff, it might be energy, it might be a person on education. So you ask for that, gets you right through to that. So if I look at why D.C., it seems like you're saying it's cleaner, it's simpler, and this is really would be a pilot project that could be evaluated, and then we could go from there in terms of other states. Is that seem to summarize it?
Yes, but it's not that we're really ignoring New Jersey. We are New Jersey, so we do have a bill in New Jersey as well.
Oh, okay.
However, there is no way that school choice is going to pass in any state or D.C. without major help from the public. It's not coming from the politicians. The politicians are looking, to be frank, they're basically afraid of those in power. The power really stands with major unions that are opposing it. The power of those unions is indescribable.
Talk about teacher unions now.
The teachers' unions together have 4.7 million members. That's 3 times the size of the United States Armed Services altogether. They have
Wow.
So, and they vote. And that vote is like ammunition. It's power. So that's one thing. Besides, on average, I know from New Jersey, they're paying $1,000 membership a year. It's coming out of their paychecks just like taxes. If you multiply 4.7 by 1,000, you get $4.7 billion. Nobody talks about that. You don't read it in the papers. But that's a lot of money. That speaks.
And money talks, as you said.
And on top of that, you know, they do get to indoctrinate the children to their way of thinking. So you're dealing with enormously powerful forces. The only way to change it, it's not going to come from politicians. It's going to come from people, many people. Everyone really has to, that really wants better education for their children, improved education, has to get involved and let their public officials know that this is what they want.
Let's get into the Civil Rights Act, D.C. Civil Rights Act for equal educational opportunity. Just to read a brief summary here. This bill mandates that parents of all Washington, D.C. children currently eligible to attend D.C. public schools who choose to have their children educated at an approved non-public schools be given an education debit card for each child that would function as an education savings account valued at half of current costs. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that? I mean, it's a good summary statement.
Well, basically, that's, you can call it a voucher, but it would be half of what they're spending now for whatever category of student that happens to be. So you know, whatever it is, if it's a high school, so whatever they're paying for high school. If it's a K or K to 12, whatever they're paying. So half of that amount would be the parents, any parent, every child would be eligible for that amount to go with the child. And this is a new innovation that you just said there about savings, educational savings accounts. Unlike a voucher puts a floor under which educational cost will not reduce, because since you're, let's say for example, half they're spending $30,000, let's say it was $15,000. So if the voucher was $15,000, it would keep education there. Even if you would innovate and be able to bring the cost down, it would artificially be kept at that amount.
I see. Okay.
But by giving it in the form of a debit card, that could be a savings account. That could, if you bring down the cost through efficiencies in education, that money, let's say you bring it down $1,000 or $2,000, let's say, so you're now spending through efficiencies just $13,000. That extra $2,000 will stay in your account for next year and next year and next year.
So it rolls over.
Rolls over even into college years.
Okay.
So there is an incentive to be able to bring down the cost of education through efficiencies, and with the technology we have today, the sky's the limit.
Now, when you talk about, I guess there are a couple of questions. One, approved non-public schools. Now, what does it take to be approved?
This bill does not get involved in that.
Okay.
We already have in D.C. a pilot voucher program that there are many schools that are eligible, religious schools, non-profit schools, private schools, doesn't matter. And there is a process. Every state has that process. D.C. has that process. The bill doesn't deal with that. That, if you want to start dealing with everything in education, try to fix it with one bill, that would get very cumbersome. So what we're saying is this bill deals with the funding, just the funding, so that you're just transferring the power back to the people. And everything else remains just as it is. So that we're not going into that saying which schools should be approved. That legislation exists. So we trust that the government, hopefully, is approving the right schools.
Okay, so for this bill, you take what you already have as far as approved schools,
right,
and what the government, or the state, the D.C., has said is approved.
Right.
Okay.
And whatever guidelines they have, new schools could come in. This would be an incentive to bring in new schools, because right now what they have there is like $8,000 vouchers for the pilot program. That's not really, it's skimming by. It's not really enough. This would be half of what they're spending now, which would be closer to $15,000. That would be an incentive to bring in schools, private schools. You don't have that incentive so much now. Still, they have a 90%, those that are getting the vouchers have a 91% graduation rate compared to 56% in the public schools. So they're doing pretty good the way it is.
That's 56% in the D.C. public schools? Or?
Right.
Okay.
Graduating high school.
Right.
And the kids that are getting the vouchers, which is not special selected kids, because they have to go through, you know, they don't pick and choose. You know, if there's a lot of kids that apply, they'll have, they won't pick and choose them. They'll just get a lottery. They'll be lucky getting, so it's the same kids, and they're graduating at the rate of 91%. So they're doing much better.
Just something that people might wonder about is, where do charter schools fit into this? How does that?
Charter schools are someplace in between. It doesn't fit into this thing exactly, because charter schools are still public schools.
Right.
They just give more. They just alleviate some of the regulations, and they allow parents more input, but they're still public schools, so it does not give control to the parents.
Okay, so it's still
completely
federally controlled. Really,
yeah, so it's something in between. It's like a compromise situation.
Okay.
It's not exactly what we're fighting for.
And this applies to non-public schools. Right,
This
so
would go
right.
to all non-public schools.
So,
right.
so if a person, this doesn't apply to a parent who says, well, I'd like to switch my school to a better public school.
No,
This
this
is
doesn't
to-
deal with that.
no.
Does not deal with that at all. No.
Okay, okay. So that's important to clarify that, because, you know, you have all these pieces, the charter schools, you know, you have public schools, you have charter schools, you even have private charter schools too, don't you? Do you not?
All charter schools are government schools. They
Okay.
are former public schools, and that puts a great restriction. For example, a parent wants a religious education for their child. And that could be very important if you want to hold the family together and the family's religious and you want to raise the children the way the parents are. They can't do that in a charter school. In fact, a charter school could be the same as a religious school. You could, in New Jersey, they actually have a law like that. You can have the exact same school, the same building, the same teachers, the same program, same books, but everything has to, all religions got to go. You could keep
okay.
whatever you want in that school, but the religion's
Okay.
got to go. So it's basically, you know, basically what you're doing is violating the First Amendment. The whole
Okay.
idea of is to have freedom, religious freedom, individual freedom.
Right.
And this is a way to kind of deny that to parents
Right.
that want that for their children.
This is really a freedom proposal.
It's basically, that's what it is. It's not only that, you know, it goes way beyond education. When you're talking about education, education is really the nursery of all society. Everything begins with education. And we have a lot of problems in society. We have crime. We have 1.5 million gang members roaming the streets of America. I mean, that's a figure that I saw, a stat. Where's that coming from? It's coming from a failed educational system. We have more people in jail in America, way, way beyond any country in the world. Where's it coming from? Coming from a failed educational system. Because everyone looks at education as arithmetic, reading, writing, arithmetic, right? No, education is basically, the reason government is even involved in education is because if you want to have a harmonious society, you've got to raise good citizens that know what you're supposed to do, what you're not supposed to do. Well, we know that in public schools today, they're very careful in telling you what you're supposed to do, what you're not supposed to do. You're not allowed to talk about that too much, because you have to decide what's right and what's wrong. Well, that itself is very, very destructive. And we're feeling this now. It started basically in the 60s. It wasn't always like that. Education, we did recognize in this country that education was not just reading, writing, and arithmetic. This was always recognized. Religion was very part, in the early years, very part. It was, the founders were very religious themselves. And you have to have a moral upbringing if you want to avoid these kind of problems.
Now, one of the things that people might bring up is this whole issue of separation between church and state. And if you're talking about going to a non-public religious school, how do you address that?
Well, you mentioned that we started this in the organization, Parents for Free Choice, right after the Supreme Court decision. And that Supreme Court decision was what sparked it, because that issue was brought up to the Supreme Court. The first voucher program came about in Milwaukee in 1980, and then they fought from 1980 to 1990. So 1990 they got the first voucher program in America in Milwaukee, and then they fought it up to the Supreme Court of Wisconsin. And the Supreme Court of Wisconsin said it's all right because the parents choose where to send the kids, not government telling you where to go. In fact, now it's a violation of the First Amendment because the government is financially coercing you to send your kid to a school that's going to be teaching you a form of religion. Religion is not only religion. If you're teaching anti-religion, you know, if you're telling kids that, you know, that what your parents told you at home is a lot of nonsense, that's also kind of religion, even if it's negative religion. So that's really, if you read the First Amendment, it goes both ways. You know, you don't want to make religion, but you don't want to go against religion.
Right,
That says
right.
clearly in the First Amendment.
So this is are you saying then that this is settled law as far as the sending, as far as having vouchers or whatever it is,
Supreme Court.
going to a religious school?
The Supreme Court decision
Supreme Court
basically
decision,
says
so it's settled.
Absolutely,
It's really settled.
absolutely.
Okay. All right. Good. Now, a couple other things that I think people might be interested in. What, if you were to get into some of the details, you talked about, maybe we can go into that now, we talk about the education debit card, the savings account. Another issue that will come up is Common Core. You're certainly familiar with Common Core. I think a lot of our viewers are familiar with Common Core, but that is really a federal mandate and control of curriculum. And it will be, as soon as the textbooks start to, and they want to align textbooks with the Common Core mandates. How does this address that in this way? Will schools be approved only if they have Common Core mandates in their curriculum?
Common Core has to be fought from, by all people. Everyone has to speak up. Basically, it's a violation of the Constitution straight out. And the 10th Amendment of the Constitution basically allows for the states to handle education. So right away, the federal government should not be basically bribing the states is what they did. They bribed the states with some $4.5 billion and said, you got to give us a proposal and it's got to include Common Core, blah, 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 and they paid them off and they needed the money in desperate times in 08 or not that time. That happened behind closed doors. People had nothing to say about it, never came up in Congress, it never was voted in any state legislature. It's basically symbolic of everything that's going wrong now with our federal government. They're out of control, and this is just way out of control. If everyone would just pick up the phone and call their congressman and say, get rid of this thing, it doesn't belong in a free society at all. They have no business telling parents and schools, and it's so baseless, because the whole concept of education is that every child is an individual. Every child needs you can't say that every child has to have the same education. It's so ridiculous, it doesn't even make sense. Every child is an individual, and they want to have one education for every child. It just doesn't begin to make sense.
Does that become a problem for your legislation?
Not at all. It's the actual...
As far as the approval piece, like what schools will be approved, have you heard anything about that?
No.
Nobody said to you, look, if they're, we can't approve a school for this unless
it's two battles have to be fought. The battle, by the way, the battle against Common Core is being fought very, very strongly. If we'd be fighting the battle for school choice as strongly as we're fighting with, that would be great, because they would complement each other. I
think Oklahoma just pulled out of Common Core, did it not? We have about 3 states.
I don't know. There were some states pulling out, and that is great. I think that every state should be pulling out of it, and every person that really cares about education should be telling their legislators at the state level and the federal level that this has got to go. It has absolutely no place in a free society. Whatever.
What kind of pushback do you get on this? What are the objections to this?
One objection that you get from everybody, top to bottom, it's impossible. Impossible. Well, at one point, everything that we have today was impossible. Whether you talk about inventiveness or you talk about things like civil rights was once impossible. Slavery was accepted in the country. We lost 600,000 people fighting to free the slaves. And women's rights, women had the right to vote, didn't have the right to vote till 1913. And I'm sure before that it was impossible. And then everything that ever came along, whether it's airplanes or cars or refrigerators, everything was once impossible. The way to make it possible is just by people learning about the issue and getting involved. And if every person that was concerned about education, every individual would just pick up the phone, as I mentioned before, and speak to their congressman. And it's one phone number. You could speak to your congressman, to your 2 senators. You call that number. It's a simple number, 202-224-3121. Call that number. If they ask you where you're calling from, because they sometimes ask me, I'm Alliance for Free Choice in Education. You're also Alliance for Free Choice in Education, but keep us informed. If you say you're Alliance for Free Choice in Education and you get through and you get some comments and you get some interest, let us know. Get in touch with. You could look us up. You could Google Alliance for FOR Free Choice in Education, and you'll get in touch with us. Or you may have our email address posted there.
Now, you said that they tell you it's impossible, but what specifically are they referring to? I mean, what are the specifics?
I think that, if you look at the history, it's 1955 is when Milton Friedman came up with this idea. It's not my idea. Milton Friedman, and knew what he was talking. He explained it well. He went around the country talking about it. He started an organization for school choice, Friedman Foundation for School Choice, and he was on TV. He was interviewed. I mean, this was something that he worked on for 50 years, a half a century and more, and people saw that it's not getting anyways, and they see why, because of this monstrous organization that I described before.
Oh, the unions.
The unions,
yeah.
They've got the money and the power.
So that's what, when they say it's impossible, they're really talking about union objection and resistance and fear. We're really talking about fear.
Yeah, and it's the politicians are afraid of the unions.
Right.
Our task is that they need to be more afraid of the voters than the politicians. Like we saw recently in Virginia. You know, the people, when they get together and people decide that there's a better way, the people, because of the numbers, because you have your votes, you far outnumber the unions. There's still a small percentage of the population.
We're getting a little short on time, but tell me, where does this stand right now? Where does your legislation stand? What's
it stands in the hands of every person out there. There is nobody sponsoring it so far because, as I described, there is. Actually, we heard from the leading politicians, hey, we need your help to get this done, meaning the public. Okay. You've got to get the public there. So what we're doing now is basically what's required. The public is the only way it's going to happen is with public support. And public support doesn't mean that you have to give up your job or your family life or anything. Right. You could spend 5 minutes, literally 5 minutes, pick up the phone and call your congressman, your senators, tell them about this. You could send them. You could find the bill at the website, Alliance for Free Choice in Education, and they could find the bill there and talk to them. Set up a meeting. We'd like to come and talk. Spend the meeting with them, with you. We'll go to Washington and meet with your congressman, your senators, and get it done.
Well, we're just about out of time, but it sounds like what congressmen are saying is we need some cover. We need cover, and so call us, give us some cover, and then maybe we can do something for you. What they're really talking about. Yes. Well, I want to thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
And this is Liberty Action Network. We hope you enjoyed the show. Powerful discussion, and we'll see you again next time.